Maria was not the kind of woman who turned heads when she walked into a room. She lived her life simply, choosing peace over attention, and kindness over pride. People often called her ordinary, but to those who truly knew her, she was far from it. She had a heart bigger than most, filled with warmth and humility. Unlike many women who lived surrounded by wealth, Maria never cared for glittering jewelry, expensive clothes, or showing off riches. She found her joy in small things, sharing tea with neighbors, cooking her favorite dishes, and watching the evening sunset from her garden. She was married to Richard, a man who had built his empire through hard work and dedication. He was known as a billionaire businessman, but to Maria, he was simply her husband, the man who still remembered to bring her flowers on Sundays and listened to her thoughts with respect. While others only saw Richard's fortune, Maria saw his heart, his struggles, and his kindness. They shared a life full of comfort, but Maria never allowed money to change who she was. In the city where they lived, Maria often walked around without any sign of her wealthy background. She wore simple cotton dresses, kept her hair tied back, and carried a plain leather bag that had been with her for years. She could afford dozens of luxury handbags, but she always said, "Why buy 10 when one is enough?" This simplicity sometimes made strangers mistake her for someone struggling financially. Maria never corrected them. She didn't feel the need to prove her worth through appearances. One morning, as she watered her plants, Maria thought about how old her car had become. It was a small sedan that had served her well for many years, but it had started showing signs of age. The doors made creaking sounds, and the air conditioning often failed in the summer heat. Richard had told her many times to get a new car, but Maria had always replied, "This one still works. I don't need another yet." But that day, she thought differently. She wanted a safer, more reliable car, not for herself but because Richard always worried about her safety when she drove alone. So, after breakfast, she decided to go to a luxury car dealership that had recently opened in the city. She didn't inform Richard. She wanted it to be a small surprise for him, to show that she was finally ready to upgrade her old car. She imagined driving back in a new vehicle, smiling at her husband's proud look. Maria dressed the way she always did. She wore a simple blue dress and flat sandals. She didn't put on any jewelry except for her wedding ring. She tied her hair in a neat bun and carried her small, worn-out bag. Looking at herself in the mirror, she smiled. She knew she didn't look like the usual customer at a luxury dealership, but she didn't think it mattered. After all, she was planning to spend her money there. Surely, they would treat her like any other buyer. She took a taxi to the dealership, humming a tune on the way. The city was busy that morning, with cars rushing past and people heading to work. Maria looked out the window, lost in thought. She wondered whether she should choose a black car, like Richard always preferred, or maybe something lighter, like silver or white. She wasn't someone who cared much about luxury, but she wanted a vehicle that was safe, comfortable, and easy to drive. When the taxi stopped outside the dealership, Maria stepped out and looked up at the tall glass building. Inside, she could see shiny cars lined up in rows, each one polished to perfection. For a moment, she felt nervous. She had never walked into a showroom like this before. She took a deep breath and reminded herself, "I am just here to look. There is nothing wrong with that." As she walked through the glass doors, the cool air from inside touched her face. The floor gleamed, and the cars sparkled under bright lights. A few staff members stood near the entrance, wearing crisp uniforms and holding clipboards. They noticed her, but their expressions did not change to welcoming smiles. Instead, they glanced at her dress, her bag, and her plain sandals, then quickly looked away as if she did not belong there. Maria ignored their coldness and walked further in, her eyes bright with curiosity. She admired the cars, touching the shiny surface of one and looking at another's interior through the window. She whispered to herself, "These are beautiful, but I must find one that is right for me." She waited for a salesperson to approach her, but no one came. She saw them speaking politely to another customer who had just walked in wearing a suit. They offered him brochures, explained features, and smiled at every word he said. Maria stood nearby, expecting that once they finished, someone would come to her as well. But minutes passed, and no one came. Finally, she gathered courage and approached one of the staff members. She softly asked, "Excuse me, could you please tell me more about this car? I'm interested in knowing the price and features." The man looked at her briefly, his eyes scanning her plain clothes, and replied in a cold tone, "These cars are very expensive. Are you sure you're in the right place?" His words hit Maria like a stone. She felt her cheeks warm, but she kept her composure. With a polite smile, she said, "Yes, I am sure. I would just like some information." The man sighed and said, "I'm busy right now. Maybe you should check the smaller dealerships across the street. They might have something within your budget." Maria froze. His words were not just dismissive, they were insulting. She realized he had judged her completely based on how she looked. She wanted to argue, to say she could afford any car in that showroom, but her gentle nature held her back. She simply lowered her eyes, nodded, and stepped back. The humiliation burned inside her. She felt like the ground had slipped from under her feet. She had only wanted to surprise her husband with a new car, but instead she was treated like someone unworthy of stepping into that place. She slowly turned and walked out, her heart heavy. Outside, the sun was bright, but Maria's mood was dark. She stood by the road, waiting for a taxi, her thoughts running wild. She asked herself why people judged so quickly, why they could not see beyond simple clothes. She felt small, invisible, and deeply hurt. As the taxi drove her home, Maria leaned her head against the window, staring blankly at the passing streets. She told herself she would not mention this incident to Richard. He was a busy man, and she did not want to disturb him with her pain. But deep inside, she knew the wound of that humiliation would not heal easily. That night, she sat quietly at dinner, smiling at Richard and pretending everything was fine. He noticed her silence but did not press her with questions. Maria went to bed early, but long after turning off the lights, she lay awake, thinking about how quickly people decide someone's worth based on appearance. Little did she know, the insult she suffered that day would lead to a moment the dealership staff would never forget. The next morning, Maria woke up early with the same thought in her mind. She could not stop thinking about her old car. It had served her faithfully, but it had become a burden now. Every time she started the engine, she worried whether it would take her safely to her destination. Sometimes, the brakes felt weak, and sometimes, the car shook as if it was tired and ready to stop forever. Maria thought of Richard's words, "You should replace this car. It's time for something safer." He had said it so many times, and yet she had always postponed it. But that day, Maria wanted to make a decision for herself. She did not want Richard to handle everything. She was his wife, his companion, and she wanted to take responsibility too. She wanted to walk into the dealership, ask about the cars, choose one, and later surprise him with her bold choice. She dressed as she always did, nothing fancy, just her plain cotton dress with soft colors, her old sandals, and the leather bag she had carried for years. She had money with her, that was never the issue. But she had no interest in pretending to be someone she wasn't. She believed that people should be treated with respect no matter what they wore. As she stepped into the taxi and gave the driver the address of the luxury dealership, her heart beat a little faster. She was nervous, but there was excitement too. She imagined herself behind the wheel of a new car, something elegant and safe, driving home to Richard and watching his proud smile. The taxi pulled up in front of the dealership, and Maria stepped out. The building looked even more grand in the daylight. Large glass windows reflected the sunlight, and behind them were rows of shiny cars. Each vehicle looked polished to perfection, as if they were waiting to impress anyone who walked in. Maria took a deep breath and pushed open the heavy glass doors. The cool air inside carried the faint scent of leather and polish. She walked slowly, admiring the cars one by one. She bent slightly to peek into one, her eyes lighting up at the comfortable seats and sleek design. But as she looked around, she felt something strange. The staff inside were not paying attention to her. A group of salespeople stood near the front desk, chatting quietly and glancing at her every now and then. Their expressions were not welcoming. It was as though they were wondering why she had come in at all. Maria ignored their stares and continued walking, trying to focus on the cars. She touched the handle of a silver sedan and whispered softly to herself, "This looks nice. Maybe this would suit me." She looked around again, waiting for someone to come and explain the details to her. But no one moved. Instead, she noticed a man walking in just a few minutes after her. He was dressed in a sharp black suit, carrying an expensive watch on his wrist. Immediately, 3 salespeople rushed towards him with bright smiles. They offered him brochures, shook his hand, and walked beside him as if he was the most important person in the world. Maria watched this quietly. She understood what was happening, but she chose to remain calm. After waiting for several more minutes, Maria finally walked toward one of the staff members standing near a desk. She smiled politely and said, "Excuse me, could you please tell me about the price of that silver car over there?" The man looked up at her briefly, then scanned her from head to toe. His eyes paused on her plain dress, her simple sandals, and the small old bag in her hand. Without a smile, he said, "That car is quite expensive. Maybe you should look at smaller cars in another showroom." Maria's smile faded. "I just want to know the details," she said softly. The man shook his head. "Madam, these cars start from millions. Are you sure you are in the right place?" His tone was not only cold but carried an edge of mockery. Maria stood still for a moment. She could not believe the words she was hearing. She wanted to explain that money was not a problem, but her gentle nature kept her quiet. She thought, "Why should I have to prove myself? Why should I tell them who my husband is just to be respected?" She nodded slowly and stepped back. She walked toward another corner of the showroom, hoping perhaps a different salesperson would treat her better. She approached a young woman who was arranging some brochures and asked, "Can you please tell me about this model? It looks very comfortable." The woman glanced at her and then at the brochures. With a quick shake of her head, she replied, "This model is reserved for clients who have pre-booked. It's not something you should be worrying about. You should try somewhere else." Her words were polite on the surface, but her tone was dismissive, almost pushing Maria away. Maria felt a sharp pain in her chest. It wasn't about the car anymore. It was about dignity. She had walked in with respect in her heart, but she was being treated as if she didn't belong there. Her eyes grew moist, but she did not want anyone to see her tears. As she turned to leave, she heard faint whispers among the staff. 2 salesmen near the desk were chuckling quietly. One of them muttered, "These simple women come in just to waste time. They never buy anything." Maria's steps grew heavier. Each word felt like a stone thrown at her pride. She reached the glass doors, pushed them open, and stepped out into the bright sunlight. The world outside was noisy, but inside her heart, there was only silence, an empty silence filled with hurt. She stood on the pavement, waiting for a taxi. For a moment, she thought of walking back inside, confronting them, and showing them her husband's name or her bank account. But she didn't. Her pride did not come from money. It came from the values she carried in her heart. And those values told her to walk away with grace, even when she was disrespected. A taxi finally stopped, and Maria stepped in. As the driver asked for the destination, she gave him her home address in a soft voice. She leaned her head against the window, staring at the city passing by. The cars, the shops, the people all looked the same, but Maria felt different. She felt smaller, almost invisible, as if her worth had been measured and dismissed by strangers in less than 5 minutes. When she reached home, she quietly paid the driver and entered the house. Richard was in his study, speaking on the phone. Maria did not disturb him. She walked into the kitchen, made herself a cup of tea, and sat by the window. She sipped slowly, but the taste felt bitter. Her thoughts circled back to the dealership. She replayed the salesman's words, the way he looked at her dress, the way he laughed with his colleague. She tried to shake it off, but the memory clung to her. For the first time in years, Maria felt ashamed of her simplicity. She wondered, should I start dressing differently? Should I carry a fancy bag or wear jewelry just to be respected? But deep inside, she knew that wasn't who she was. That night, Richard asked her if everything was all right. She smiled and said yes, not wanting to worry him. She kept her pain hidden, carrying it silently in her heart. But she did not know that her silence would not last long. The next morning, things would change in a way the dealership staff would never forget. Maria woke up the next morning with a heavy heart. The sun shone brightly outside, but inside her chest was a quiet storm. She moved around the house, completing her chores as usual, watering the plants, preparing breakfast, folding clothes, but her smile was missing. Normally, she hummed little tunes while working, but that day there was only silence. The incident at the dealership played again and again in her mind. The salesman's cold voice echoed, "Maybe you should look at smaller cars across the street. These are not for you." The memory stung like a wound that refused to heal. Every time she remembered their mocking glances, her eyes filled with tears, though she quickly wiped them away before anyone could see. Maria sat at the dining table, sipping her tea slowly. She stared at the cup, lost in thought. She was not angry because they had denied her information about a car. She was hurt because they had denied her respect. She believed every human deserved to be treated with kindness, no matter how rich or poor, no matter what they wore. Yet, she had experienced the opposite. For the first time in her life, Maria felt that her simplicity was a weakness. She thought, maybe the world only values appearances. Maybe if I had worn an expensive dress or carried a designer bag, they would have welcomed me with smiles instead of throwing me out with cold words. But even as she thought this, another part of her heart disagreed. She had always been proud of living simply. She had never pretended to be someone else. Why should she change herself just to please strangers? Her heart battled between sadness and pride. Richard, meanwhile, was busy with his morning calls. He was preparing for a meeting with foreign clients and did not notice right away how quiet Maria was. Usually, she came to his study with tea and a cheerful remark. That day, she only placed the cup on his desk and left without a word. Richard frowned slightly, wondering if something was wrong, but he thought she might just be tired. Later in the day, Maria went into her garden. She sat on the wooden bench under the shade of a tree and looked at the flowers. Normally, she found peace in watching the colorful petals dance in the wind. But that day, even the flowers failed to lift her spirits. She picked a rose and held it in her hand, asking herself silently, why does the world judge so quickly? Why do people think money is the only measure of worth? She thought about the other customers at the dealership. She had seen how the salesman had rushed to greet the man in the black suit, offering him brochures and respect. They had not even checked his wallet. They had only seen his polished shoes, his expensive watch, and his confident stride. That was enough for them to treat him like royalty. But when they looked at her, they saw none of that. They saw a plain woman in a simple dress. To them, she was invisible. Maria felt tears gather in her eyes, but she brushed them away. She did not want Richard to see her in this state. She had always been his source of calm, his strength, and she did not want to trouble him with her pain. That evening, at dinner, Richard noticed her silence again. He looked at her and asked gently, "Maria, is everything all right? You've been very quiet today." She forced a small smile and said, "Yes, everything is fine. I'm just a little tired." Richard studied her face. He knew her better than anyone else. He could see the sadness hidden behind her smile, but he chose not to press further. He thought she would share when she was ready. After dinner, Maria went to their bedroom early. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, while Richard continued working in his study. When he finally joined her, she pretended to be asleep. She did not want him to ask questions. She turned to her side and closed her eyes, but inside, her mind was wide awake. All night, she thought about dignity, respect, and the shallow way people judged others. She remembered her childhood, when her parents taught her that true wealth was in kindness, not in gold or diamonds. She remembered how she had promised herself never to look down on anyone, no matter their status. And now, she had experienced the cruelty of being looked down upon. Her heart ached, not only for herself but for all the people who faced such humiliation every day, those who were judged for their clothes, their jobs, or their simple lives. She wondered how many of them carried the same silent pain she was carrying now. The next morning, Maria tried again to behave normally. She smiled at Richard, prepared his favorite breakfast, and even hummed a soft tune while cooking. But Richard was not fooled. He watched her carefully, noticing the way her smile faded the moment she thought he wasn't looking. He saw the tiredness in her eyes and the way she avoided talking too much. Finally, when he finished his phone calls, Richard walked into the kitchen. Maria was washing dishes, her back turned to him. He placed his hand gently on her shoulder and said, "Maria, something is troubling you. Please tell me. Don't carry it alone." Maria froze for a moment. She wanted to keep silent, but his gentle voice melted her defenses. She wiped her wet hands, turned to him, and lowered her eyes. She began slowly, "Yesterday, I went to the new car dealership in the city." Richard looked at her with interest. "You did? Why didn't you tell me? That's wonderful. Did you see something you liked?" Maria shook her head, her voice trembling. "I didn't even get the chance to look properly. They didn't treat me well. They thought I didn't belong there. They asked me to go somewhere else, where cars are cheaper." Her words came out in fragments, heavy with emotion. Richard's face darkened, but he let her continue. "They didn't even ask me what I wanted. They just looked at my dress, my bag, and decided I wasn't worthy of being their customer." Her voice cracked. "It hurt, Richard. It hurt more than I can explain." She wiped her eyes quickly, embarrassed to cry in front of him. But Richard gently held her hands and said firmly, "Maria, you never have to feel ashamed of your simplicity. You are the purest soul I know. If they could not see your worth, it only shows their blindness, not your weakness." Maria looked at him, her eyes moist but calmer. She whispered, "I just don't understand why people judge so easily. Why they think money defines respect." Richard held her close. "That is the world, my love. But we will show them something they will never forget." Maria did not understand what he meant, but his voice carried certainty. She felt comfort in his words, though the pain still lingered in her heart. That night, as Maria finally slept peacefully, Richard sat awake, thinking. He knew what he had to do. Not to prove their wealth, but to teach a lesson about respect and dignity. A lesson the dealership staff would remember for a lifetime. The following morning, Maria tried to push away the bitter memory of the dealership, but Richard had not forgotten their late-night conversation. He had listened carefully to every word she had spoken, and though Maria had tried to hide her pain, he had seen it clearly in her eyes. Richard was not a man who raised his voice or lost his temper easily, but when it came to Maria, her dignity mattered to him more than anything else. He rose early, dressed neatly in his tailored suit, and called his chauffeur to prepare the Rolls-Royce parked in their garage. This particular car was one of Richard's favorites, a symbol of his success. Its shining black body reflected the morning sun like a mirror, and the silver logo on the hood gleamed with quiet pride. Maria noticed the movement outside from the kitchen window. She saw the chauffeur wiping the Rolls-Royce and Richard adjusting his cufflinks. Curious, she walked to him and asked softly, "Are you going somewhere important this morning?" Richard turned to her with a gentle smile. "Yes, my love. And you are coming with me?" Maria frowned slightly. "Where?" He took her hand and replied, "To the place that tried to humiliate you. We are going back to that dealership." Maria's heart skipped a beat. She shook her head immediately. "Richard, no. Please. I don't want to go back there. I don't want them to think I am returning for revenge." Richard squeezed her hand firmly. "This is not about revenge, Maria. This is about respect. You walked in there with dignity, and they treated you without it. Today, they will learn what true dignity looks like. And I want you by my side." Maria hesitated for a moment, but Richard's calm voice gave her strength. Slowly, she nodded. She trusted him. Soon after, the two of them stepped into the back seat of the Rolls-Royce. The leather interior was soft and comfortable, and the air carried the scent of luxury. Maria looked out the window as the car pulled away from their house. Her heart was beating faster than usual, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from the thought of facing those people again, not as the woman they had dismissed, but as someone who deserved to be seen and respected. The city roads bustled with morning traffic, but everywhere the Rolls-Royce passed, heads turned. People on the sidewalk slowed down, some even pointing at the car with admiration. Maria sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap, while Richard remained calm, gazing ahead with steady eyes. When the car finally stopped in front of the dealership, the staff inside immediately noticed. A Rolls-Royce was not a common sight, and they rushed to the glass doors, eager to welcome whoever had arrived. Maria saw their sudden change in energy. She remembered how those same people had ignored her just 2 days ago, but now, with one look at the car, their smiles had returned. The chauffeur stepped out first, opening the back door with respect. Richard stepped out, his tall figure commanding attention. He extended his hand toward Maria, helping her out gracefully. She stepped onto the pavement, her simple dress fluttering slightly in the breeze. She hadn't dressed any differently that morning, still the same humble style, the same plain sandals, the same leather bag. But this time, the staff did not dare dismiss her. Their eyes widened as they realized she had stepped out of the Rolls-Royce with the man they instantly recognized, Richard, the billionaire businessman. Whispers began among them. One said, "That's him. That's Mr. Richard." Another muttered, "And that must be his wife." The sales manager, a tall man in a suit, rushed forward with a nervous smile. "Good morning, sir." "Good morning, madam. Welcome to our dealership. It is an honor to have you here." Richard looked at him calmly but did not return the smile. "We came yesterday too," he said in a steady tone. "But your staff decided my wife was not worthy of being here." The manager froze, his smile fading slightly. The other staff members shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the truth in Richard's words. Maria stood silently beside him, her heart pounding, but she held her head high. Richard continued, "My wife walked in here with respect, hoping to buy a car. Instead of helping her, your team judged her by her appearance and insulted her dignity. Is this how you treat your customers?" The manager stuttered, I'm deeply sorry, sir. There must have been a misunderstanding." Richard raised his hand, stopping him. His voice was firm, yet calm. There was no misunderstanding. There was arrogance. And arrogance has no place in business. The staff looked down, ashamed. The two salesmen who had mocked Maria the previous day stood at the back, their faces pale. They now realized the woman they had insulted was no ordinary customer, but the wife of a man who could buy the entire dealership if he wished. Richard glanced at Maria, then back at the manager. "We did not come here to embarrass anyone. We came to remind you of something simple: every person who walks through these doors deserves respect, whether they wear silk or cotton, whether they arrive in a Rolls-Royce or on foot. If you cannot see that, you do not deserve to sell cars." The manager lowered his head, murmuring, "You are absolutely right, sir. I apologize to you and especially to Madam." He turned toward Maria, his voice shaking. "Madam, please forgive us. We misjudged you. It was wrong, and I am truly sorry." Maria listened quietly. She saw the fear in their eyes, but she also saw their shame. She did not raise her voice, nor did she insult them back. Instead, she said softly, "I don't need apologies. I only hope you treat the next simple person with more kindness." Her words were gentle, but they carried weight. The staff members nodded, unable to meet her eyes. Richard placed his arm around Maria and led her back toward the Rolls-Royce. Before stepping in, he turned once more to the staff and said, "Remember this moment. A business grows not because of the cars you sell, but because of the respect you give." With that, the chauffeur closed the door behind them, and the Rolls-Royce pulled away smoothly. The dealership stood in silence, the staff shaken by what had just happened. Inside the car, Maria leaned against Richard, her heart lighter than it had been in days. She looked up at him with gratitude and whispered, "You didn't have to do all this for me." Richard smiled gently. "I did, Maria. Because your dignity is priceless. And no one has the right to take that away." Maria's eyes glistened, but this time with joy, not sadness. She realized that true wealth was not the luxury cars, the grand house, or the Rolls-Royce. True wealth was love, respect, and the strength to stand for what was right. The car drove on, leaving behind not just a dealership, but a powerful lesson. As the Rolls-Royce glided smoothly through the city streets, Maria sat quietly beside Richard. The morning sunlight touched her face, and she felt a strange calmness filling her heart. Only yesterday, the memory of the dealership had weighed heavily on her soul. But now, after what happened, she felt lighter. The wound was not completely gone, but it no longer carried the same sting. She looked at Richard, who sat calmly, his expression steady as always. She admired him deeply, not just for his wealth or power, but for the way he used both with grace. Many men in his position would have shouted, demanded, or tried to humiliate those who had wronged their wives. But Richard had not done any of that. Instead, he had spoken with calm strength, teaching a lesson without raising his voice. "Thank you," Maria whispered softly, her eyes moist. Richard turned to her, his lips curling into a gentle smile. "For what?" "For standing by me," she said. "For reminding me that my worth is not in clothes or appearances but in who I am. Yesterday, I felt small, almost invisible. But today, you reminded me that simplicity is not weakness." Richard took her hand in his and squeezed it. "Maria, you have always been my strength. You are not simple, you are extraordinary. The problem is not with you. The problem is with a world that values shiny shoes more than a kind heart. But today, we showed them that respect should never depend on wealth." Maria leaned back in her seat, thinking about his words. She realized how often people forgot this truth. They rushed to impress those who looked rich and ignored those who seemed ordinary. It was a cycle she had now experienced firsthand, and it had changed her forever. When they reached home, Maria went straight to her garden. She walked among the flowers, her hands brushing against the soft petals. The roses, the lilies, and the jasmine all stood in their natural beauty, needing no jewels to make them precious. Maria thought, This is how life should be. Every person is like a flower, unique and worthy of love, no matter how simple they appear. Over the next few days, Maria noticed a change in herself. She no longer felt the quiet shame that had crept into her heart after the dealership incident. Instead, she carried a new kind of confidence. Not the confidence that came from luxury or status, but the confidence of knowing her worth. She smiled more freely, spoke with more assurance, and even when she went out in her plain dress, she walked with her head high. Richard noticed this too, and it warmed his heart. He had always admired Maria's humility, but now he admired her strength even more. One evening, as they sat together watching the sunset, Maria said, "Richard, I keep thinking about what happened. I wonder how many other people go through the same kind of humiliation every day, people who are judged for being simple, for not looking wealthy. Not everyone has someone like you to stand up for them." "I feel for them." Richard nodded. "Yes, you are right. That is why we must always treat people with kindness. A business grows because of trust, not just money. A society becomes stronger when respect is given equally to everyone." Maria smiled softly. "Maybe I was meant to go through that experience not just to feel the pain, but to understand it deeply. Now I will make sure I never, ever judge anyone by how they look." Her words were sincere, and Richard felt proud. He knew that Maria's heart, though wounded, had become even more compassionate. News of their visit to the dealership spread quietly in the business community. Many people came to know about the incident. The dealership staff, especially the ones who had mocked Maria, never forgot the lesson they had learned that day. For weeks, they talked about how one simple-looking woman had walked in quietly, been dismissed, and then returned the next day in a Rolls-Royce that humbled them all. It became a story whispered among employees as a warning: never judge a book by its cover. But for Maria, the real victory was not in making them regret their mistake. The real victory was in finding her own strength and remembering her values. She did not want revenge, nor did she want to see anyone humiliated. She only wanted people to learn that kindness and respect cost nothing, yet they can change lives. Days turned into weeks, and Maria continued with her life as before. She still wore her simple dresses, carried her old bag, and walked into shops without showing off her wealth. But now, she walked with a quiet power. If someone treated her with kindness, she returned it with warmth. If someone dismissed her, she no longer felt hurt, because she remembered who she truly was. One afternoon, Maria and Richard went for a drive in the very same Rolls-Royce. As the car moved slowly through the city, Maria noticed a woman standing outside a bakery. She was dressed simply, her clothes faded, and she carried a basket of bread. People walked past her without noticing, but Maria looked at her with respect. She turned to Richard and said, "You see, there are so many like her, people who may not look rich but who carry stories, dignity, and worth within them. We must always remember that." Richard smiled. "That is why I married you, Maria. You see what others overlook." Maria's eyes sparkled with quiet pride. For the first time since the painful incident, she felt stronger than ever. The world could judge her appearance, but it could never take away her values. That night, as she sat by the window watching the moon, Maria reflected on her journey. From the humiliation at the dealership to the lesson learned afterward, it had been a painful path, but also a necessary one. She whispered to herself, "Life will always test us. Some will try to make us feel small. But true strength is not in proving them wrong, it is in staying true to who we are." And with that thought, Maria closed her eyes, her heart at peace. The dealership would forget many customers, but they would never forget the day when a simple woman arrived, was dismissed, and returned with dignity in a Rolls-Royce. For them, it was a story of shame. But for Maria, it was a story of strength, respect, and love. In the end, she remained what she had always been, a woman of simplicity, humility, and grace. Only now, she carried a lesson that would stay with her forever, that respect should never depend on wealth, and dignity should never be taken for granted.